Good evening everyone. Today we're going to be exploring about 3 different methods that we can use to get a finished look on an artwork. I'm going to be using the same image, it's going to be a pixel, and I'm going to be painting it with 3 different styles. So let's just dive into it. So for style number 1, what we want is to get all our dimension right. So we're going to be sketching it. So once you're done sketching, the second thing you should do is that you should ink it. So what you do is that you lower the opacity of the actual sketch that you did, and then you outline with a hard pen, and usually it could be like an ink brush, and you go over your lines and make sure that they're clean and crisp. Depending on what look you're going for, you could either have things very detailed or with minor details. For this example, we're going to try to give it a comic book feel, so we're going to go very detailed. Once that's done, you should take out your base layer, which is going to be the sketch, and only keep your ink file on. Next thing you do is you want to find your base color. Usually your base color is the middle between your light and your darkest object. So usually what I do is that I paint from dark to light, so I always try to find the middle ground, or at least the most color used on the image that I'm trying to paint. From there on, you want to start laying down your flat colors. Just map out everything slowly so that you have like a feel of the entire image. I always call the entire image first. That's helpful because it helps you kind of see how the finished picture will look like. When that's done, next you know is that you start to build up your image. You start to find the middle tones, and also always remember where your light source is from. So from there you always build. So you go from dark, middle tones, light, and then details. You want the details to come last because you want it to be the most popping, shiny feature in your image. And always remember is that when you put your details down, you should always put it in a different layer just in case you make a mistake, so that you could just take it off without affecting your entire drawing. So here we're building this picture and it's almost done. As you can see, we're putting the final details on them, and then once we finish with this, we're going to be moving on to style 2. We're going to call this style 1, and I call this my comic book style. Just a bit of final touches and a little bit of shadow enhancing. And yeah, that looks good to me. It may not be 100%, but that does it for this lesson. Also, on a side note, for the purpose of consistency, I'm going to be using the same base for all 3 styles. So now this is the base from style 1 we're going to be using on style 2. You want to do the same thing as we did last time, and we want to find our base colors. For this one, we want to use kind of like a marker type brush. I cannot share this type of brushes because they're not even mine, but I can say places like Deviantart is where you could kind of find brushes that suit you and a bunch of free packs. So same thing as before, we want to find our shadows first, and we're going to be laying them down, masking, pulling your flat colors just so you can fill out the entire canvas and you can kind of get an idea of how the finished drawing is going to look like. Always make sure for this style that you want to make sure your colors are flat. It's supposed to be like a marker, so there won't be much blending or mixing with this one. And if your video is too fast, you could just kind of slow it down with the YouTube feature. I just don't like long videos, so I'm trying to have everything under about 10 minutes. Anyways, moving on. Now I'm actually laying down my first foundation for light onto my drawing. And when you're using like a marker type brush for this, is that you should go into your color palette, and some people like it distorted by using hue. How that's done is that you find the color you want, and then you just basically offset it. Another good way is that you just kind of brighten, or you just take another color similar, like by moving your color palette slider a little bit down or a little bit up. I think all those work fine as long as you're not using white, because white makes your drawing look musky. White should only be used if they have no other way to pull out the light source from your drawing. Like if everything is really dark, or everything is too bright, that, you know, for example, if you're using yellow is already a very bright color, so how do you brighten up from a yellow? You may have to use a little bit of white to have, like, you know, more light showing through. That's one of the few rare instances where using white is okay. But as you're looking at my drawing here, we're actually about to finish. I'm using, for this technique, the most important thing is always remember everything is lines. There's no shading, so don't be afraid to use fat skinny lines. It's not that different from the first style, but it is just way more edgy. Now this is the final style, and this is the one that I use more when I'm trying to give a client like a final work. We won't be able to do that here, but at least we can still go about how to get the process done. So the first thing that I do, same as the other one, is that first I lay down my midtones. Second is that I identify where my light source will come from. And another thing is that I want to be able to close off those sketchy lines. So keep in mind that I changed them from black to brown, because I don't want them to be able to to be too strong, because in the end you don't want to have any line show, and you want it to look as real as possible. So now you start to build your drawing slowly. Move your brush all around the painting, and this type of brush that I'm using actually has a little bit of lower opacity than my previous two. You can always raise them, just make sure that the flow is different, because you want everything to feel soft. So now I'm starting to build my drawings, and the lines are starting slowly to come off. Don't be afraid to make any bold line, because you can always soften them later. Just be mindful of the separation between a very white or bright color next to a dark object, because that's really where you could give that illusion. That's why you want to be very careful. And it doesn't always have to be sharp. You can always leave things a little blurry or soft, as long as you mask it well. Again, I'm doing the same thing all over the drawing here. Notice how I keep going back and forth between my I call it my light and dark colors. It's because I'm trying to find a middle tone that I want to keep for my object, and there's no way you can just pull that off the color palette with ease. So now we keep, you know, softening our drawings, and we are moving the line. Obviously you only do this if you had a sketch first, like a sketch base. And you know, if you don't have any sketch base, then you don't have to worry about any line, and you can just build right from the start. Notice how I haven't used any strong hard lines. I'm just basically using middle tone colors everywhere. So I'm gonna have my entire piece in middle tones first, and then I'm gonna be pushing the highlights, and I'm also gonna be pushing down on the shadows. That is where the illusion comes from. That is what gives it that 3D feel. So the two major rules to get this style to work is that one, you don't want any lines to show, so you always gotta find a way to hide those lines. And the best way to do this is always to have a little contrast going where the line should have been. And number two, it's just that you make sure that you have no hard edges, because anything that has a hard edge gives it that paper cut type feel, and that's how your eye is usually able to tell when something is a drawing. So if you want to keep that photorealistic look, then you should always avoid the very hard edges. So as this tutorial is coming to an end pretty soon, I'm going to start wrapping up this drawing, and I'm going to be moving on to the details now. When it comes to details, you want a brush that's a little more flat, not so smooth around edges, because now you want to add definition to your drawing. These are the part that's the very important trick here is that you want people's eyes to just pop or like follow those specific areas, and it gives you that illusion of like when you look something through a camera lens where like the background could be blurry but then the foreground is in focus, or vice versa. This is the time when you give your drawing that illusion. And for me in this painting, I'm going to be using the pepperonis and a little bit of the crust towards the top, but everywhere that the cheese is supposed to be, I'm going to leave it smooth and a little bit blurry, and those two contrasting effects are going to be colliding with each other, and then your eyes is going to, a little struggle to try to make sense and go into focus. That's where the illusion of 3D is going to come out, and that's basically how you execute realistic look, or at least one of the ways. And just in terms of style, this is kind of how I approach drawing. So yeah, I mean that's basically it for these three styles. My favorite one is always number 2, but I don't mind doing number 1 and number 3. It all depends on the commission and what the client wants. So that's about this for the lesson, and I'm gonna be laying down all 3 styles so we can look at them side by side.